So now we're starting to come out of the spirit times. Things were still more spiritual in those times, if you will. We went through 4 levels. And so this is almost like the 4th dimension removed from the spirit times as we are right now, where we just have vestiges of our animal forms through our crests and a Megam Gat. So this refers to the Tanis. So they dance of this story of us descending from the heavens. And a Megam Gat, he had big long claws like copper nails. And they were practicing hunting with a bow with this ring, rolling it through the forest and shooting at it with arrows. And then a Megam Gat, this wild creature who did descend from the heavens, who has a greater spirit within him, if you will, was stealing these arrows. And then they tracked him down and got these rings to kind of subdue him and hold him down because he was just an unruly beast. This is representative of the rings that they used to tame that spirit. A story about myself, I would think about, partying and perhaps taking advantage of my youth, and now I'm getting into older age and trying to, keep myself together and be a better person than I was yesterday. And so red cedar is representative of this wild spirit taming of a Megam Gat. And so the people of that time were able to subdue him and then start training him. And I think they practice ways of getting these spirits. You could hear the spirits like whispering and screaming within his hair. And so they removed all that and tried to make him into a real person. And one of the things that they did was they brought him through all the nations to restore the pieces of Ayaawk. And that's where we're at right now. The story of the Tsm'syen is about restoration and these cycles of restoring yourself and teaching yourself new skills, taking responsibility for your tribe, taking responsibility for your lands. And so he was able to restore himself. And the Guisalite, the dance, the songs, it's all connected with the returning to the heavens, if you will, and restoring ourselves. And so this is the Guisalite that Gerald Weenat has developed, and that is for our chief, the Tsm'syen. He would wear this. There would also be rattles and down involved as we clear the way for spiritual undertakings to commence. And this is the formation of the dance societies. So one of the best things that we could do for the future is create dance societies, do the drumming, the singing. It was our intention for me to be trained up to actually perform those songs with Gerald. And I often do them when I'm out in the field. And so not in front of an audience just yet. It really ties a lot of tribes on the coast with the regalia, the songs and the dancing. It's very relative to the flood stories and descending from the heavens and restoring ourselves within our culture and becoming real people, healing ourselves. So it's one story and 4 particular bloodlines within the Tsm'syen nation, right? The Lachibu, the Laskik, Ganhara, and Gisputwada. Due to various migrations throughout the surrounding nations, as we do now, there's lots of representation from Giksan to Niska, all the way down into the Salish territory, and it's wonderful to see everybody here. I'm becoming more versed in the locations of everything, so I could really relate to what some people are saying anyways, not all of it. So that's a little rundown, the broad overview of what it means to be Tsm'syen. So now we're going to jump in a little bit into more contact. So the disruption of the culture, contact, not least the residential schools, that was one of the later things that came along. The disease, tens of thousands of people to just 300 or just below 400 people from the disease alone. It is a miracle in itself that we still have all of this information intact. Leaders of these corporations who were given contracts, one of the first contracts ever conceived was for a corporation, and they could basically do whatever needs to be done for the queen, in the name of the queen. So they had an extreme amount of autonomy. And one of the first things that they did was learn our culture and marry into the Sigidamanak, the Na'a Sigidamanak. And then once they started doing business, logging, fishing, and things like that, nobody would really challenge them because they're already married to the highest authority within the land. So this is a picture of Metlakatla. Just before the journey where other people went up to New Metlakatla. So just talking about the disruptions of the culture and where we are now, right? So that was one of the things, was Metlakatla, Lachulams, and now we got this new identity, this new thinking of what it means to be Tsm'syen as well. So these reserves, these outposts, really drew us all in with the commerce and the wealth that was being exchanged. And it was just the thing to do, not least the destruction of our fish weirs. So we were forced to work in the canneries, and the disease. So basically it was just full-on genocide. And as I said, it's quite a miracle that we have everything intact as it is right now. Then they started actually taking kids and bringing them up through the system, and now the system is basically, you know, what's in vogue. It's just all we know to quite an extent. So yes, all the disease, all of the marrying and intermingling, that was worse enough in itself. The severance from the land, and then the residential school, they would come back not knowing their language. They would be speaking English, they wouldn't know much of their history or the past, the elders. You know, that's echoed in today, where a lot of people don't even know their tribe, or they know their crest, and that's about it, and then the house system and the names within that house. And then finally the Indian Act came about, and this just made us, I think, wards of the land. I'm not sure if much of that has actually changed. We're actually still under the Indian Act, and that was developed by 32nd degree Freemasons. As I said, it's just more of that genocide, not to mention the disease, and there was lots of deals being made behind closed doors, lots of laws being passed. The establishment of Lachulams and all of that, which is it's a Western kind of iteration of a matriarch, Lams, which means little wild roses. She died on Rose Island, and then she was buried there, and immediately these little roses popped up. So this became the central hub of Tsm'syen. At one point it was Spasunt. So Spasunt was the fall meeting area. So we would go upriver to our river houses. We would harvest and do all of that. And then we would come down in the wintertime in Lachain. So that's where I'm from. So I basically grew up in a little city on Lachain, or Cain Island as it's known these days. 32nd degree Masons set up everything. They were the cops, they were the judges, they were the lawyers, they were the mayors, they were everything. And they were highly connected to the Hudson Bay Company, so they had a lot of money, they had a lot of organization, right? And so this is an overhead shot of Bainan, I believe. So Bainan did a lot of research about what it meant to be Tsm'syen. I believe it was in the 1930s, around about, is when he was going around and trying to understand what it meant. So he himself did not have a full picture. So by early 1900s, we had lost a lot. And it's probably never ever going to be the same, but we still got so much that we can actually reconstruct our culture as it is. So yes, they set up this outpost, and lots of commerce was going through there. Hudson Bay Company, I believe, the fur trade. If you filled up with, I think it was marten, or I'm not sure what exact animal it was, you take that boat back, your family's good for generations. So that's the amount of wealth that was kind of going through there. And these are 8 tribes. So one of them being Kachis. I'm not sure who's missing. There ought to have been 9 here. One of the tribes was Kitwell Sabach. So there was originally about 11 or 14 tribes 10, 12,000 years ago. We all centralized into Lachlu Lams. Now it was either that or Port Essington, which is known as Spasunt, or Lachain. What decided everything was the railroad. So the railroad came through, then Lachain became the central hub, if you will, and this is our main village, that which kind of directs the Tsm'syen nation as we know it these days, some 700 residents of 14,000 of us, or 4,000 of us that exist today. Yes, and then the allied tribes, so the two reserves, Metlakatla, the Hulams, then Metlakatla, they were one of the first to realize that things were not going to ever chop up. Nobody was going to agree. So with the Canadian government and such, and the question of Native American sovereignty, if you will, was not going to be honored. So they decided to work with the Tontaquan and see if it's okay for them to move up to what's known now as New Metlakatla, because they have history there as well, not least with Nis Laganoose. So Laganoose, same story, that's of Tlingit origin, meaning crazy to the end of his nose. And we'll get to that in a moment. My family directly ties with all the Ayaawk. And so we had the two villages, Metlakatla, Lachlams, and all of our other villages were forgotten or destroyed through the destruction of the weirs, and then we just ended up there, and that's the central hub of Tsm'syen, if you will. So Herbert Wallace, he is the last Nis-Yaganat that was probably a little more groomed. Everything really started to break down around 1940s, and as I said, by the 1900s, Gwisalite was probably our regalia, and huge components of our culture was already kind of wiped out of the picture. So Herbert Wallace, he realized that he didn't have any matriarchal descendants of him, so his house didn't have any heirs. So he looked towards the house of Negayat. You're probably not going to see her, but she is represented in here. She's a younger lady on the top right-hand side in the middle. So she was transferred into our house. It's not really an adoption, just because there's such strong blood connection with that, but yes, she was transferred from Negayat, who was Likikiket at the time, and still to this day, I believe, into a Tsm'syen house. So we still had central authority within the land, and this is Henry W. Tate's family, and thus our bloodlines were restored. So this story is a little further into the future. So this is 1918, and this is my great-great-grandfather, John Nelson, within the house of Ts'm'syen, and I believe he was, according to some resources, he was actually Ts'm'syen. That would be Maud Nelson. So we skipped one generation. There's one generation missing from that, and then Maud Nelson is my great-great-grandmother. She was the second or third generation of Nis-Yaganat since the transference, and I believe you need 4 generations to be considered full-blooded, which would have landed on my grandmother. So this is 1918, so a lot has already happened since then. 1860 was the flu pandemic, 1887 everybody moved up to New Metlakatla, so these outposts were already established, so there's lots of disruption there. 1887, and then the Indian Act shortly came after that, so the 1918, and this is about the 1940s, Henry Helene. This is when the Squamish title came back from New Metlakatla, Alaska, and back into Tsm'syen, the Gitland territory, and this is all part of the rekindling of the clans. And so we did a lot of arranged marriages. We practiced a lot of marrying into people of your station. So, it would be considered proper for me to marry into other royalty and such. For peace, of course there was a crest system to ensure that there wasn't foul things going on. And so this is part of the rekindling of the clans, and everything is already well underway. And this is the story of our family. Trying to restore the bloodlines, because as I said, they were decimated by disease and litigation, rules, things of that nature. So, Spirit of the North Wind. So now we're getting into the times of my grandmother and my grandfather. The way I see it, there's the ancient times and then the modern times. And they were like right on the cusp, where a lot of them still grew up in the big house, and there was a Samoganamanuk present. She was properly trained. She wore a librette, and they sat my grandfather down by candlelight for 14 days. Yes, as the Siganamanuk overlooked the proceedings, Hannah Green, yes, of course, thank you. And perhaps Henry will speak of that from the Gittendal tribe. So that's the Wiltsiwact, Gittendal. After 14 days, Hannah Green stood up, put a labret in her mouth, and laid her money down. So under formal operations, if you will, if there's things being said, as I said, like I share with the host, the guests, and then I tell about myself and then my business. Why am I here? And then whether or not people are for or against, you actually put your money into the center, if you will. In this case, she was for it, laid the money down, and put her hands over the proceedings like this. And then from there, it was recognized that my grandfather would be Scugum Smoggit Skegwet, but he got the intermediary title of Knee Sweep Ass. So he never ascended to Scugum Smoggit Skegwet, but a lot of people recognize my grandfather as one of the last great patriarchs of our time. And even people would speak of my grandmother and Tsm'syen, Scugum Simgiget and Tsm'syen. She would be of first place within all of Kachis. They would speak of her as a Samogit, as a Simgiget, which is really still quite strange because that's how it should have been. But people are like, whoa, blown away that she handled herself in such a way. It just goes to show you the mentality of our family and people that looked up to us as well of that time. And it was just perfectly natural as it was. And so anyhow, we're just going to talk a little bit about, now we're getting into my grandmother and then my mother. My mother being Amdoch. Amdoch was held as the transference from the Gate was done. And so she holds this as well, and that's one of the intermediary titles to Tsm'syen. So we have here in the photo Weenat, Gerald Stewart, a member of our house, as he did a lot of canoe journeys, worked with the Squamish, made the connections with Henry Seaweed. He went over to Geneva and made more and more connections. This story of our family trying to restore Tsm'syen as it was continues on into the early 90s. A quick little experience about, my aunts and my uncles. I did grow up knowing that we were royalty, quote unquote. I was like, oh, that's cool. And, chief was thrown around, and I'm under the Kispiox band, which is my father's side, because that's the way people do it in the West, but I'm Kanhara because of my mother, but I'm also Canadian, and BC is really cool, right? So you got all these things pulling you all over the place. I believe Gerald, and there was a few select people that actually understood what it meant to be Tsm'syen, what it meant to be in this Halite series, and dancing, and understanding, descending from the heavens, and becoming whole in Ayaawk. And so he did a lot of those journeys, met with some Squamish as well, of course. And so this is nothing new that we have here. It's just our intention to perhaps rekindle it and look towards the future generations. And I believe there's a photo of them raising paddles. So as you approach and you raise your paddles, not only are you showing some crests and stuff up there, but you're also telling people that you're coming in peace. Lots of work were done, not least in Geneva, and there's quite a culture over there in Germany of people dressing up like Indians and such, and everything that they've learned is from like textbooks and such, and so they got some wonderful stories about that. Yes, so that is the spirit of the North Wind. As I've seen it, it's just a restoration of our culture. As I said, I grew up myself quite Western, as did my my aunts and my uncles. So my grandparents, as I said, it was really that bridge between the modern and the ancient, and it was so strong in my grandparents. Just to give you a little context of like a little bit of how much I'm removed from that, but with the aid of Henry Green and Gerald Stewart, I've been able to polish myself up and perhaps even consider myself being worthy of wearing the yellow cedar. So I've tamed myself. I'm polishing, and they're grooming me to be a leader. And there's a little more to Ayaawk than just land claims and resources and wealth and power, and that's what it always kind of devolves to. So I really try to stress on the whole restoration of the self through Ayaawk, the ancestral matriarchal law. And the rekindling continues. So there's a lot more to say and a lot more to be done. But this is a shot of the rekindling of the clan's tea that we had. And there was a Tsm'syen present, not least my Wilk'siwakt side. So my father is Tsm'syen, Lachibu, of the Wilp's Neast. So his brother, my uncle Billy, who now holds Neast, came down. You know, he was like, oh, well, I'll just listen. I don't think I'm going to say anything. But he was absolutely blown away by everything that we did. We had the regalia out, the hosts, the kanharas were standing, they were serving. You know, we weren't there, just there to party. We were there to do business and share our history. Much like this, we had a big genealogy chart. We had some weaving, cedar weaving going on. More dancing is needed, some more regalia and things of that nature. And it was just such an honor. We did 4 days. We were flying by the seat of our pants, but there was also kind of like a lot of natural things that came together. And it was just such an honor. Some less fortunate people came in. My uncle came in, Rudy Kelly, who was this, media personality as it is right now. So it was a fantastic event, but as I said, what really stood out to me was serving people, giving them food, giving them tea, welcoming them into my house, and sharing our stories. And so that's where we're at. From the spirit times to a lot of this colonization coming into question. Colonization is kind of the tag word or the hot word to say these days, but it's really the severance from our old ways. And so, yes, my uncle was there, and Tsm'syen is overseeing us. She was present, of course, as is only natural, the talking stick, the regalia. We were given gifts at the time, so at the end of our proceedings, we gave out the gifts, and then we danced. That was early spring. Now we're all caught up. Early spring, hooligans, little fish. We were pulling them out of the river. That's really the story of my journey. You really haven't missed much. But it's only through Henry Green and Gerald Stewart that I've been able to catch up so quickly. So we did a lot of harvesting. I was getting out on the land. And not a lot of Tsm'syen know their lands, their lachiup. They don't know their wak, their house. They don't know their watk, their names. It was really quite a privilege to go up all and down the river, look at the land as best as I can through the eyes of the Thlaggiget, the ancestors, and harvesting and getting in touch with nature and trying to use my language, smiling, right? Trying to learn that as much as I can, reconnecting with the land, trying to get an idea of where the villages were, and using the traditional names of the tribes, and understanding that the WAP is the central authority, held in place by the Google Yansk, to be distributed through all time generations. So that's our focus now, is to polish ourselves up a little bit, and then look towards the next generation. We're really trying to get those traditional ways back, and get the people out on the land, maybe even create shelters to begin with, and maybe even like a relax and WAP, a big house. Then we could do more proceedings such as this with other tribes, with other nations, strengthening our ties within the Skat. I got quite a few relatives there, and Kitkatla, Tsm'syen, and not least down here, because we're all intermarrying into one another. That's been nothing new in our history, so that's why we're here now. And one of the main things is just to seek guidance, to restore ourselves further. Awesome. Thank you.